Hi everyone, my second video on my vlog series. It's Mark. Today I want to give you my testimony about where I come from in terms of my relationship with Christ, etc. Just to give you some context about me and kind of where I'm coming from. So I want to get it done under 15 minutes, so I'm going to be as quick as I can. And it kind of does cover a broad territory, so I'll get started. I was born into a single parent family. My father had left when I was 2 years old, and that was something that I really, I guess, keenly felt was the absence of my father and a father figure, and it really deeply affected me as a child. And because of that, I started to go a bit, I guess, nuts. It's one way of saying it. By the time I was 8 years old, both me and my sister were put into an orphanage because my mother had a mental breakdown and was put into a hospital. After a while in the orphanage, we were moved into foster care until my mother eventually, quote unquote, recovered, and we were reunited as a family. I guess by then the damage had really well and truly been done. By the time I was 11 years old, I started drinking. By the time I was probably about 11 or 12 when I started to make my first tentative steps into the occult. By the time I was about 13 or 14, somewhere around there, I started to engage more with the occult. Tarot cards, Egyptian magic, seances, etc., etc. All the not so wonderful stuff. When I was about 15 years old, I started experimenting with drugs, and just before that, I'd actually been involved with, or I committed a number of offences, criminal offences, as I think I was about 13 or 14 when I did that. I ended up before what they call the panel, which was like a intermediate children's court. By the time I was 15, I ended up getting involved with drugs. By the time I was 17, I was classified as an alcoholic. So I'd been drinking from the age of 11, 17. By the age of 17, I was becoming increasingly violent, punching holes through walls, doors, etc., etc., etc. And then I ended up moving to the city, and I ended up basically being kicked out of where I was living. I ended up on the street. Well, I ended up a little bit of time I was on the streets every now and again. Park benches. Once I slept in the toilet block. Then I ended up in what was initially a rental home, but then ended up becoming a squat. The squat, and I was there, I can't remember how long I was there for, but about 6 months, I think. And I ended up to the point where I was just taking drugs. I wasn't eating. I hadn't eaten for 2 weeks, in fact. And I ended up, I was extremely emaciated, extremely sick. I went for a walk, which should have, to get some money, which should have taken me at most half an hour. It took me about 3 hours just to walk there. I was that weak. I ended up in a refuge called Percy Mission. I had a chap there. Oh, and by the way, underlying all of this was because I was actually raised a Catholic, but never had I heard about Jesus. I had no idea who Jesus was. All I knew was really just a little bit of basic Catholic doctrine, about the bread and the wine and the saints and Mary and all that sort of thing. In fact, my mother was a nun before, obviously, I came along. So I had some kind of religious background, but not a real Christian background. So I ended up going into Percy Mission, and there was a guy there called Neil, and he was just a lovely guy. And he started to talk to me about the Bible. He didn't tell me about Jesus so much. He just kind of, we talked about the Bible, because obviously I knew about the Bible. And he basically suggested that I read a Bible. So I took a Bible up and I was reading it, and I was like, man, this is like watching paint dry. It's just boring, because I was reading Matthew. Then after a while, I kind of put it down and I picked it back up, and I didn't really want to offend Neil because he was such a lovely guy, so I just said I'll just give it another shot. So I started reading the book of Revelations. Now that was not boring, that was very interesting to me. So I started reading that, and then I went one night to a church, and I didn't go to a church because I was seeking God. I went to a church because I basically had a thing for this girl, and the girl was going to the church. I thought, oh, if I go to the church and maybe I'll have a chance, sort of thing. So I went in the bus, and on the way up there, we went to the church, and I never really took any notice of what was being spoken of in the church, just none whatsoever. I was just like, yeah, whatever. In fact, I think I went out the back and kind of hung out there and just totally switched off to anything. I wasn't interested. Then on the bus ride on the way back, there was a girl there, one of the girls that kind of was affiliated loosely with the refuge, and she had such a peace, and I could see it. It was tangible. It was like, for want of a better word, an aura, and it was just like radiating from it, and I could see it. And I said to her, I said, "What are you on, man?" Because I thought she must be taking something good, And she said, "Just Jesus." And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Just Jesus." I'm like, "Come on, you're on something. Let me know what you're on." And she's like, "It's just Jesus." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know. You have to ask an older Christian." She had just become a new Christian. And I didn't ask an older Christian. I just kind of heard that, and I went back and I thought, man, there was so much peace. I could see it. I could feel it, because even though I wasn't a Christian by this stage, I'd become very kind of sensitive to spiritual things, because, like I said, I had been involved with the occult. So I basically, and I remember this day that I was still reading the book of Revelations, and I read about the abyss and all the spirits, basically like locusts that have been released from the pit, etc., etc., etc. And I was like, and I knew that I knew that I knew, and I didn't know how I knew, but I knew that every single thing that book was talking about was going to happen. And I was like, man, I don't want to be here when this happens. I want to miss out on this. So I started to pray and seek God. Now, bear in mind, at this stage, I had no idea who Jesus was. All I knew about Jesus was that he was one of the dudes in the Bible. He was one of the guys in the Bible, like Moses, Abraham, Daniel, all these guys in the Bible, and Jesus was just one of those many guys. I had no idea who Jesus was. No idea. And I started seeking God and seeking God and seeking God, and praying and praying and praying, like just on my knees, just, God help me, God help me, God help me. Anyway, one night, and it actually wasn't that long after all this happened, one night I was praying, and the entire room all of a sudden was filled with what I kind of thought back then was like electricity in the air. And I just lifted my eyes to heaven, and I said, Jesus, I want you in my heart. I want you in my heart. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea about asking Jesus into your heart. I just was acting on what I'll call now holy kind of impulse. So I said, Jesus, I want you in my heart. I want you in my heart. And I went to sleep that night. I slept like I'd never slept before, and I woke up the next morning, and it was like 1,000 light bulbs had been switched on inside of me. I was having a shower the next morning, and I was singing this song. I'm saved, and I had no idea what being saved was, none whatsoever. And then I said to God, I said, well, I'm a Christian now, and I better go to the church. Oh, and before this happened, I said to the Lord, I said, well, in fact, no, the Lord spoke to my heart and said, because I still had tarot cards and I still had occult stuff, and he spoke to my heart and he said, you need to destroy these. I had no idea that this stuff wasn't right, but I knew what he had said, so I did what he'd asked me to do, and I destroyed them. Then the day after that, it was a Sunday, and I said, well, I better find a church, because they weren't going back to this other church that I'd gone to before. So I said, I need to go to a church. And now, whether people believe this or not, I really don't care, because it happened. God spoke to me and he said, I'll show you where there's a church. So I basically stepped out. I'd never been up to this part of town before. I'd stepped out and he says, now go up here. So I went up there and he said, now turn left. I turned left and you go up through this alley. I went up through this alley, and all of a sudden I was standing in front of a church. That morning I gave my public confession, acknowledging Christ as my Lord. And that night I got filled with I got baptized in the Spirit of God. Now some people say, well, no, baptism happens at the same time. I'm not here to argue the logistics of you. I mean, I can argue from the scriptures that no, it can come at a later time. And I'm just telling you what happened to me. So from there, obviously I engage in this new Christian life, and I wish that I could tell you that it's all been a bed of roses from here on in, but it hasn't. There's been times where I've been rebellious. There's been times where I've struggled. There's a lot of issues in my life that I've struggled with, and I do continue to struggle with issues in my life. But the reality is that Jesus Christ that day made me alive. Now, I'm not perfected, as the Apostle Paul said, not that I've already attained or I'm perfected, but the one thing I do is press on, and that's what I do now. I did go to Bible college. I did go through all that route of things, but I never kind of got into to ministry. I used to go on the evangelism team and all that sort of thing, but I've never been one who's kind of been involved with leadership or anything else like that. I've just been what they call the laity, so to speak, which is really that's a false division. But anyway, more about that in another video. And since then, I've been involved I've moved away from institutional Christianity, and I've moved to what is known as organic church, which is more about us seeking Christ and putting Christ as the head of the church, because that's his rightful place. So, and that there's a whole story around that, which was pretty amazing. Like, it was definitely God orchestrating things to make things happen. So, but I will relay that in another video. But that's basically my testimony. I'm on the journey. We're all on the journey, and I grow in knowledge and wisdom, maybe at a slower rate than others. Excuse me. Maybe at a slower rate than others, but that's okay. The scriptures say, I would rather be a doorkeeper in my Father's house and dwell in the tents of wickedness. It's about the journey, and it's about relationship with Christ. That's what it's about. I've seen the power of God at work. I've seen miracles happen. I've seen the eyes of a blind boy being opened and all that sort of thing. And those things are wonderful and they're great, and they confirm the power and the majesty of God. But for me, it's about relationship, just like it was from the very beginning. I didn't need someone guiding me in terms of telling me I have to do this and that. God chose me and got me on my own with no one telling me the gospel. Some people say, oh, that's such a wonderful test. I wish I had a testimony like that. But God needed to give me that testimony. He needed to come to me in that way for specific reasons that were unique to my situation. My testimony is no more powerful or no less powerful or no more powerful than someone who simply came to a church, had their eyes open and gave their life to Christ, with someone preaching the gospel to them. There's no difference. At the end of the day, there's only one thing that the angels of heaven rejoice over, and that's whether you repent and come into the kingdom of heaven. That's all that matters, you know. So I'll leave you with that. Bless you. I hope that you are encouraged through that testimony. There's always hope. It doesn't matter what you've been through. Jesus Christ is hope. He is the hope of mankind. There is no other true hope of mankind. Thank you.